Kim was a trusted public figure, sworn to uphold the law, but behind his badge, there was a secret that no one could have imagined. In the quiet hours of the night, his wife lay dead, her life cut short by the very man who had promised to protect her. What drove a police chief, a man of authority, to turn his hand against the one person he was supposed to love? Was it a crime of passion, or something far more calculated? Death wasn't an accident. It wasn't a random act of violence. It was the beginning of a plan that would tear apart a family, a career, and an entire community. This wasn't a case of a husband grieving for a wife gone too soon. This was something else. What happens when a man in power is willing to do anything to get what he wants? And what would drive him to betray the very people who trusted him? Stay with me as we uncover the chilling details of a crime that shook the city of Houston to its core. Houston, Texas, 2018. Police Chief Michael Lawson was a man of authority, known throughout the community as a steady leader. He had the respect of his colleagues, the trust of his neighbors, and the admiration of many. On the outside, everything seemed perfect. A high-ranking officer, a devoted husband, a soon-to-be father, he appeared to have it all. But as the city carried on with its daily routine, behind closed doors, things were unraveling. For all his public virtue, Michael had one fatal flaw: a craving for something more, something that would drive him to make choices no one would ever have imagined. His wife Emily was everything Michael was not. She was warm, compassionate, and full of life. At 27 years old, Emily was pregnant with their first child, a boy they had already chosen to name Lucas. The future looked bright for the couple, or so it seemed. But what Michael didn't want anyone to know was that the perfect picture of his marriage had started to fade long before Emily ever suspected it. Behind her back, Michael had begun an affair with someone far closer to him than he cared to admit. Emily's own younger sister, Lily. Lily, just 22 years old, had always been the wild card in the family, free-spirited, spontaneous, and by most accounts charming. She and Michael had crossed paths more times than anyone could count, at family gatherings, birthday parties, and holiday dinners. But somewhere along the way, Michael found himself drawn to her in a way that went beyond brotherly affection. The affair had started innocently enough, but over the course of months, it grew into something more. And yet Michael couldn't simply walk away from his marriage. No, he needed to secure his future in a way that would allow him to be with Lily without the burden of his old life holding him back. He didn't just want to be with her, he wanted everything. But there was one obstacle in his way: Emily. What Michael didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was how far he was willing to go to make his desire a reality. He knew the risk, he knew the consequences, but for Michael Lawson, the idea of losing Lily to anyone, especially to the woman he had pledged to love forever, was more than he could bear. And so, he began to plan. But this wasn't going to be a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was a cold, calculated decision. Michael didn't just want Emily gone, he needed it. And he would stop at nothing to make sure that what he envisioned for his life would come to pass. Emily, blissfully unaware, continued with her daily life, growing more and more excited about the arrival of her son. But as her pregnancy reached its final stages, her life was about to be taken away in a way no one would have ever seen coming. It would be a crime so meticulously executed, so well hidden behind a veil of respectability, that it would take months for anyone to even begin to suspect what had truly happened. For Michael, there was no turning back. His mind was set, and his desire to marry Lily had consumed him. But to do so, he had to remove Emily from the equation, permanently. However, this wasn't a rash decision made in a fit of rage. No, Michael was calculating. He was patient, and he knew that if he were to succeed, he needed to ensure every detail was in place before taking the final step. Over the course of months, Michael's behavior became more erratic, less obvious to those around him, but to anyone paying attention, the cracks in his facade were starting to show. He started to distance himself from Emily, both emotionally and physically. But it wasn't enough to just pull away from her. He needed to manipulate the situation. He needed everyone to believe that her death wasn't suspicious, that it wasn't his fault. began to tell people, including close friends and family, that Emily was struggling with the pressures of pregnancy. He painted her as an emotionally unstable woman, overwhelmed by the changes in her life. He claimed that she had been acting increasingly erratic, particularly in the final months of her pregnancy. It wasn't just talk. Michael began to stage moments for others to witness. He subtly made sure people would see Emily in vulnerable states, exhausted, tearful, and at times, irrational. When the time came, no one would question it. No one would question the possibility of her taking her own life, or the idea that the pressures of motherhood had been too much for her to bear. Meanwhile, he worked meticulously on crafting his alibi. He was careful to never leave any room for doubt. He knew when Emily would be alone, and he knew when the time to strike would come. Michael couldn't afford to make a mistake. He began to stage his whereabouts, making sure people would see him at key moments during the week leading up to the crime. He was seen out in public, talking to colleagues, spending time with friends, all the while keeping his plans close to his chest. And then, one fateful evening, everything lined up. Michael had ensured that Emily would be alone at the house, isolated from anyone who might have heard her cries or noticed the signs of a struggle. He knew exactly what he was going to do, and he knew how to cover his tracks. That night, Emily would not wake up to see the next day, and in the chaos that would follow, no one would suspect the man who had sworn to protect the city, who had sworn to protect her. On the night of September 19, 2018, Michael's plan was set in motion. The house was quiet, the atmosphere heavy with the weight of what was to come. Emily, 8 months pregnant, had spent the evening in her usual routine. She had dinner with Michael, then retired to their bedroom early, tired from the weight of her pregnancy. She had no way of knowing that this would be the last time she would close her eyes to sleep. The clock ticked on, and in the dead of night, as the world slept, Michael crept into the shadows. By then, his intentions were clear. The man who had once vowed to protect her, now prepared to take her life. He struck with cold precision, using a blunt object to attack Emily as she lay in bed. The force of the blow was enough to silence her cries, but not the horror of the final moments that followed. Emily's screams, though desperate, were no match for the violence that unfolded in that bedroom. The woman who had trusted the man she loved was left defenseless, unable to protect herself or her unborn child. But Michael didn't just want Emily dead. His plan was far more calculated than that. He wanted to make it look like an unfortunate robbery gone wrong. He knew that if he could stage the scene just right, no one would suspect his involvement. He carefully moved around the house, destroying evidence and planting clues that would suggest an intruder was responsible for the attack. The brutality of the crime, the premeditation, it was all part of the plan. Michael, with no remorse, took Emily's life with chilling efficiency. But in his attempt to cover his tracks, he left behind something no one could have predicted: the final, irrevocable consequences of his actions. When the police arrived at the Lawson residence, they were met with what seemed like the aftermath of a break-in gone wrong. Emily's purse was missing, a few valuables from the house were taken, and the home appeared to have been ransacked. But something about the scene felt off. It was too neat, too calculated. The more the detectives looked, the more they realized the crime didn't match the typical pattern of a robbery. The house showed signs of a struggle, but there were no forced entry points, no broken windows or kicked down doors. The front door had been left unlocked and the valuables left untouched, save for Emily's purse. That's when the detectives began to wonder. Could this have been a staged robbery? Was there more to this than they initially thought? As the investigation continued, the focus shifted. All eyes now turned to Michael Lawson, the husband and the local police chief. He had been the first to report the crime, but something in his statement didn't add up. His demeanor seemed controlled, perhaps even too controlled for someone who had just found his pregnant wife brutally murdered. The officers on the scene began to dig deeper. They discovered that Michael had been at home the entire night, despite claiming he was out on official business. His story of having been at a late-night meeting didn't hold up. Investigators spoke with colleagues, but no one could confirm his whereabouts. One simple fact stood out: Michael's alibi had cracks in it. The more they learned about Michael's actions in the days before Emily's death, the more troubling details emerged. He had begun telling friends and coworkers that Emily had been suffering from complications related to her pregnancy, details that seemed designed to make her seem fragile, vulnerable. His insistence on these symptoms raised questions about whether he was trying to lay the groundwork for an explanation in case something went wrong. And then came the breakthrough. A nearby neighbor had seen Michael's car parked in the driveway well into the late hours of the night. Even though he had claimed to be elsewhere, the timeline simply didn't match up. The night of Emily's murder, Michael had been home. As the investigation moved forward, the evidence kept pointing back to him. A forensic examination of the crime scene revealed traces of Michael's DNA on the weapon, a blunt object, the one used to end Emily's life. That discovery was damning. It wasn't just circumstantial anymore. Michael Lawson was at the center of the investigation, and the evidence was mounting. But what could have motivated Michael to kill his wife? A question that would linger in the minds of everyone involved. Had the pressure of his job, his strained marriage, or perhaps something even darker, driven him to murder? Was there a hidden desire, one that had festered beneath the surface of his seemingly perfect life? As the days went by, the authorities began to realize the full extent of the betrayal. Emily had been a beloved member of the community, and Michael's actions had not only cost her life, but had destroyed the lives of everyone who knew her. The more they learned about his affairs, his hidden desires, the more the community began to turn against him. There was a sense of disbelief. How could the man trusted to protect the public, the leader of the police department, be capable of such a cold and calculated act? The investigation was far from over, but Michael's fate seemed sealed. The pieces were falling into place. As the investigation continued, a chilling truth emerged. Michael Lawson had been leading a double life. For over a year, he had been having an affair with Lily, his wife's younger sister. The two had been secretly meeting behind Emily's back, their forbidden relationship hidden in the shadows. Lily had no idea that Michael's feelings for her had grown beyond mere attraction, but the reality of his affair was undeniable. Michael's desire for her went far deeper. He was determined to be with Lily, and he would stop at nothing to make that happen. By the time the police had pieced everything together, it was clear that Michael's marriage to Emily had been nothing more than a facade. Emily, pregnant with their child, had been nothing but an obstacle standing in the way of his true desires. Michael's cold and calculated actions showed the lengths he was willing to go to get what he wanted. The pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. Michael hadn't simply snapped in a moment of rage. This wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was planned. Every detail had been thought through. From the moment Emily fell asleep that night, Michael had already made up his mind. He knew exactly what he was going to do. He had staged the crime scene to look like a robbery gone wrong, making sure that no one would suspect him when the police arrived. He even planted evidence that pointed in the wrong direction. Michael's plan had been flawless, until it wasn't. The evidence began to catch up with him. It wasn't just his affair with Lily that gave him away. It was his complete disregard for the life he had built with Emily. His obsession with Lily had clouded his judgment, and in the end it was that very obsession that led to his downfall. When Michael was arrested, he showed no signs of remorse. His expression was cold, his demeanor calculated. The police had finally connected the dots: the affair, the motive, and the careful planning behind the murder. Emily's family was left shattered. They had lost a daughter, a sister, and a mother to beat. In the midst of their grief, the pain of betrayal gnawed at them. Emily's parents, who had welcomed Michael into their family with open arms, couldn't understand how the man they trusted most could commit such an unimaginable crime. Her mother, once so proud of her daughter's life, now had to face the unbearable truth that the person who had vowed to protect her family had been the one to destroy it. Emily's father, a man who had always believed in justice, was left with a haunting question. How could he have missed the signs? Yet the devastation didn't end with Michael's arrest. As the trial unfolded, an even more painful truth came to light. Emily's own sister, Lily, had been involved from the beginning. She had known about Michael's plan to murder her sister. The affair had gone far beyond lust or infatuation. Lily had agreed, willingly, to marry Michael once Emily was gone. Lily's love for Michael was the final betrayal. She had chosen him over her own flesh and blood, placing her desires above the very woman who had shared her childhood and her memories. She had been complicit in Emily's death, actively participating in the plan to remove her sister from their lives for good. The revelation left Emily's family reeling. The pain of losing Emily was now compounded by the unbearable truth that it was her own sister who had turned her back on her. The family's grief, once centered on the tragic loss of Emily, was now intertwined with a deep sense of betrayal, one that would never heal. Lily, once seen as the innocent bystander, was now viewed as just as guilty as Michael. Her involvement in the crime was an act of calculated cruelty. She had been more than just a victim of a manipulative man. She had been an active participant in his twisted plan. She had chosen love or obsession over family and over the life of the sister she was supposed to protect. Michael and Lily's lives are now shattered. The man who once held a position of trust, authority, and respect in the community has been convicted of murder. Michael Lawson, the police chief, is now behind bars, his career and reputation in ruins, and his lover, Lily, Emily's own sister, now faces charges for her involvement in the crime. But even with their conviction, the questions remained. What could possibly drive someone to betray their own flesh and blood? What kind of obsession would push someone to take the life of a family member to satisfy their own desires? Was it simply love, or was there something more to this twisted story? A deep, unsettling compulsion that went far beyond any normal motive. As the final gavel falls, we are left wondering, what happens when love turns into obsession? How far will someone go when they believe they can have everything they've ever wanted? Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to stay updated. In the next video, we'll explore another chilling case where a seemingly innocent family was torn apart by a shocking betrayal. You won't want to miss it.